Hello, could anyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Hey, it's Doug.
Hey, Doug.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
I just pasted the agenda doc into the Slack channel if you guys want to add your names to the list of attendees.
Okay. Is Ken Owens going to be moderating Doug today, or?
I haven't heard that he's not, so hopefully he's not on vacation, but we'll give him a few minutes. Otherwise, we'll plow forward without him.
Okay.
And Orit is also here.
Oh, hello. So while we're waiting, are there other topics on the agenda that you would like to add? I tried to remember what we agreed to last time.
Yeah, I wasn't here last time. Was there anything pressing that came out, like to-dos? I see there's a couple of.
I don't think there was anything major. I think it was more just everybody gave status. I think for the most part, people wanted another week or so, or another 2 weeks, I should say, to sort of do some edits and cleanups and stuff. And then I think on this call, we were going to decide whether we thought we were ready to take the next steps about, like merging the doc together and then trying to make sure all pieces fit together nicely for 2 weeks, and then consider getting a broader CNCF review.
Okay.
Yeah, we also did some homework yesterday with Kathy to advance so the discussion on the stack.
Cool.
Hey, Doug, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, hey, Ken.
Connecting with my new job is a little bit more challenging than I thought. They lock everything down here,
Oh, nice.
including all Google Docs. I have no idea, no way to look at the docs. So.
Ooh. It's weird. For a while there, whenever I tried to look at a Google Doc from the IBM site, I couldn't do it. I had to go home to do it. So, and luckily they changed that, but yeah.
Yeah, I found a way to request that this morning to get access to it. It's like, who'd ever thought you need to get access to it? It's crazy.
Are you based in Purchase, New York, or somewhere else?
I'm based in St. Louis at the headquarters.
Okay.
Which would mean a lot less travel for me, thankfully.
All right. I think we have pretty much everybody we're going to get. You want to go ahead and kick it off, Ken?
Yeah, so I think if I remember correctly, today's meeting, we were hoping to have pretty much all the different sections completed and reviewed by everyone that's participated to try to make sure that there's some consistency and flow between the different sections. And so our goal was to try to have this submitted to the TOC at the next TOC meeting, which is in, I think, almost like 3 weeks, so 2 weeks from now, I guess. So has everybody had a chance to kind of look over the documents, the different sections?
Yeah, so with myself and Orit commented a bit on the different papers. Also, we had a discussion yesterday with Kathy on the spec one. We've worked out the details on sort of the workflow at the bottom and agreed on the different aspects. So we feel it's ready to include broader review on that.
Okay.
Yeah. I think although we're going to continue working on that, I think now, yeah, people can start, review that. And maybe, I think other specs, maybe other like use case and other documents too, right?
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, there's some sections I think that I still have a few to flesh out, but I think they could be consolidated into a single deck. I think maybe that's a good step as we go into the next phase of review.
Okay.
That way, people only have one document to look at. They're not necessarily interlinked right now. So if someone's trying to do, excuse me, a consistent view across the board, it's a little harder probably now that there's a lot of content in separate docs.
Well, I can take a stab at that and have Doug review it with me to kind of see if we can pull us all together.
I've also started looking through introduce myself. My name's Amir. I'm from Docker. And Patrick Chanazan invited me to join this group because I believe an invite was sent to him. So this is the first meeting that I've been able to join given the time zone shifts that I've been going through. So I've been going through the docs, leaving some comments here and there. I think I'm through about half of them so far. So I'll be going through them over the course of the next week as well.
Great. Appreciate it.
Another point I made on the use case document, we may want to try and draw from the use cases implications on like requirements or spec related issues. Because otherwise, like if every use case is just highlighting a use case without drawing a conclusion, then it's sort of less powerful.
Yeah, so the I think in the use case section, we need to sort of make sure that a couple of them talk about the problems being solved.
Right.
And
Yeah,
that's the approach. I think we need to kind of follow that methodology for most of the use cases.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the goal for this for the use case one was to lay out, because serverless is both new and we also have some initial data on how it's been used. The goal here was first talk about those theoretical areas where it could be applied, where it's promising, and then follow that up with successful case studies. So I think that part of the doc is a little, I've got some placeholders in there. I don't have full details out, but that's definitely a gap that we want to fill because we don't want to just continue to talk about the theoretical. We want to point about how it's been successfully used already. Yeah,
but again, I think the point is that from the use cases, we can draw information about what are the requirements. What, usually when we're working on specs internally, we sort of we use the use case sections to basically help us define the sort of requirement spec.
Right.
I think that's a good suggestion. I can help with that. I think I'm going to go through the use case document and I can derive the requirements and then get it ready for people to review maybe by next week.
Yeah, so the function spec is, Orit and, Kathy, you guys already kind of assigned, or said you would kind of work on that. So definitely worth looking through that and then trying to clean that up some along with the use, bringing the use cases into it would be a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's so we clarify, from the use cases, we derive the requirements and then we compare that with a functional spec and to see, whether the functional spec satisfy those requirements.
And then it's a little bit crazy with that. I'd like to kind of go back after we get those two or three things done, Kathy, and look at the scope of the space as it exists today and kind of add what use cases and requirements are being addressed in the existing scope of what we have in the different offerings and open source projects today.
Do we want to address anything around sort of the development workflow, sort of the CI/CD pipeline, sort of the life cycle?
Yeah, I think I think when I hear that question, I kind of look at it from at least two ways we want to address it. One is, are there any gaps that we can help these projects and these companies fulfill today by leveraging a CI/CD pipeline that the CNCF provides? And then two, to the point I think you're making is, how does this impact your CI/CD pipeline? So I think addressing both of those would be good.
Is that a phase 1 or a phase 2?
I think phase 1 is maybe more of a like, how does this impact your pipeline? Whereas phase 2 would be more of the, here's how CNCF could help these projects.
Okay.
Yeah, well, maybe we can also add to the spec sort of a small section on what would be a traditional sort of pipeline. You create a function, I don't know, you build it, you submit it somewhere, then consume it, etc. Like sort of a ledger diagram or something, or not a ledger, something more simplified, maybe even just bulleted or
yeah, and if you can come up with an initial cut at that, I think that would give us all something to kind of comment on and work on.
Should that be its own section, or is that part of the function spec bit?
I think it deserves its own sort of subsection, or because it looks at things more from the developer workflow, not necessarily the invocation or
right. Yeah, developer experience. Yeah, the end user consumption model.
Yeah, and not specifically because we did list there individual lifecycle actions, like create a function, delete a function, etc. But there wasn't anything that described this is the sort of the flow or the chronological steps.
Actually, in the last meeting, I remember we're going to reach out to Amazon and Microsoft. How is that going? It would be good if we can get their involvement.
Yeah, so there were two AIs related to that. So I had one to reach out to Microsoft, and I did reach out to them, but they haven't gone back to me yet with a definitive yes or no. They're still sort of investigating internally or discussing internally. Mark, did you get a chance to reach out to AWS?
I did. I have a meeting set up with one of the senior product managers on Monday, the 10th.
I had a rough conversation with Tim Wagner over at AWS a couple of weeks ago and invited them to start participating in the working group. They had some interest in presenting their serverless application model work that they've been up to. I don't know if people are familiar with that. In the group, it's kind of very AWS specific, but they have an interest in kind of broadening it to be not AWS specific. So I have some conversations going there. So Mark, it would be good to sync up with you to know who you're talking to over there, so we kind of collapse those threads.
Okay. Yeah. The person I'm talking to is Orr Weinstein.
Okay.
Do you know Orr?
I don't. So I know Tim pretty well. So.
Okay.
So Yaron, in terms of for the notes, I marked you down as taking an action item to draft up something, and I can't remember. Did you say you were going to create a whole new section, or just create something under an existing document?
Yeah, just in the existing spec, just underneath sort of the life cycle, we'll add some more content on the sort of the relations between the elements of the life cycle. Now, what would be a workflow of a deployment workflow, etc.
Okay, great, thank you. And Ken, I put you down as taking the first pass at trying to merge the docs.
Yep.
Okay, and just since Ken, I know you can't see the doc, Chris and I went back and forth. The next TOC call is on the 11th. I suspect that might be too soon for us to present something to them, since we may not have a chance to really hash through the merge doc.
Right.
The one after
the 18th.
that. Yeah, no, Chris was saying that one may get canceled.
Well, I have to sync up with Alexis. He may decide to cancel it due to attendance, but we'll see. Then there's August 1st or 15th.
Okay. Let's target August 1st then, just to be safe.
Okay, I was going to say, if we wanted to do the 18th, we would need to set up another call for us to talk between now and then.
Yeah, the 15 is wide open too, so it's up to you. First we'll have Envoy presenting with someone else.
So the meeting will be August, right? August?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, August 1st is probably fine.
Okay, so 3 weeks. Okay. Yeah, Doc, you can put my name on the device requirement, that part. So I'm going to add that into the use case document. Is that okay? Because eventually we're going to merge all this together, right?
Yes, that's an interesting question. So if you guys are going to be making edits, do you want to wait till after they're done and they ping you when they're done, or do you want to?
Yeah, that sounds good. Go ahead and ping me next week when you're done. And once I get all clear from you three, I'll go ahead and merge it together and start trying to make it all flow correctly from section to section.
Okay.
This is Louis Fourie. I've added a couple of use case into the document. Maybe you want to just put my name on that list of contributors there. There's a section on business logic.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Maybe, Louis, you can help me together write a requirement.
Yeah, I can help in that.
Okay.
I've added your name to the top of that particular document.
Great, thank you.
All right, so it sounds like the plan is a couple people have a couple edits they want to make, and then sometime, possibly early next week, we'll ping Ken, letting him know that it's safe to now merge the docs into one. He'll take the initial stab at that, and then it should be up for review for the group, and then we'll get back together in 2 weeks with the plans of presenting this to the TOC on August 1st. Does that sound right?
Yep.
All right.
Sorry, Doc, I didn't quite get that. So what's the first action item?
There was a couple people who wanted to make some edits to the documentation in terms of adding a couple new sections. So they're going to make those edits, and then they're going to ping Ken when they're done, so he knows it's safe to merge everything into one doc.
Oh, okay. So for the requirement one, also I need to, okay, I will ping the Ken. Okay. I'll send Ken, I'm going to send you an email.
Okay.
On that. Okay.
Sounds great.
Would you be able to send a note to the list, Ken, just before, so that everyone knows that from that point you're going to be merging the doc?
I will.
Thank you.
All right. I think that's it in terms of the actual agenda that we had. Any other?
Is there any topics or sections we want to kind of review together on the call and try to close out a few comments or questions that have been made on the docs?
Yeah, actually, Doug, there's that one about the terminology. I know we probably want to talk about that. Maybe we just quickly go through them. Do we have a half hour, or is it the full hour here?
I think we have a full hour.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. All right. Let's look at that terminology. And so the question here was the way terminology was originally expressed. We assumed that we were talking about functions as a service, and we know that there's still some confusion out in the market about whether serverless is equivalent to functions as a service, or if serverless also includes a related concept of backend as a service, which is less about compute than it is about a consumption model. So the original terms, and this is pretty well laid out in that piece from Mike Roberts on martinfowler.com. I think that may be linked at the bottom of the resources. But even if we don't consider that as part of the scope, the question was, we kind of have to address it because it's in the conversation in other documents that are well known. So I think there's, just as we look over this document here, if anyone has any comments on should we limit ourselves to functions as a service, should we also include something else within the scope of what we define?
Right, so I took an initial stab at defining backend as a service, and obviously if I got the text wrong, people feel free to obviously suggest alternate text. For me, the bigger question though is do we want to try to differentiate between serverless and functions as a service? Amir pointed out that the distinction is pretty thin and it may actually cause more confusion than actually help. So I want to get feedback from the group in terms of whether we should even try to make that distinction.
Well, yeah, so I think you would almost say umbrella, serverless is the umbrella, not versus function as a service, but that it might be interpreted as covering both functions as a service and backend as a service. So I would remove from that line that's highlighted by Amir, just the serverless first part.
Okay, I think my internet cut out for a while there. Can you make the edits that you're suggesting there, Dan? Because I couldn't quite hear all of it.
Okay, I'll do that.
And I don't want to make you repeat it, just for me.
Wait, when I've been talking about it from a private cloud point of view, I've succumbed to just using serverless at this point. I tried functions as a service and everyone just has glommed onto serverless and there's not much I can do about it.
Yeah, well, that's what I would.
Yeah, I think I think it's better to use serverless. I remember someone gave a comment. I remember someone from Google said, function as a service. There are other meanings too. People that terminology, people might interpret it in different ways. But for serverless, I think probably it's better to, people will have it's better for different people to think the same about what is serverless. As long as we define here clearly, I think that's good.
Yeah, in my mind, this is Lee. I kind of toss my hat into the same ring that Mark was just saying, which is I kind of view it as, when you're talking about cloud, you denote that with public cloud or private cloud, and in my mind that's sort of the same thing for serverless, whether you're consuming from some public cloud or you're running that in-house. I don't know. I don't see FAS as I think it's only more confusing to have another term versus laying it into something that people are already familiar with, public and private.
Yeah, I think the connotations I've seen is that FAS is more used as a sort of a software stack that you deploy locally, and serverless is really more when you have a platform like AWS. It's sort of more of a serverless. I think there's also more connotation of FAS as something that's sort of I think more like Google App Engine or HTTP orientation of invoking a function, SOA kind of workload.
The way I've come across these terms with conversations I've had is that they're used interchangeably, and they're used in different ways by given the background of the people. So the engineers that I've talked to prefer functions as a service because it's more precise and less vague and fluffy than serverless. Whereas most of the other folks I've talked to who are not necessarily deploying code are just used to hearing the term serverless. So in my experience, these terms are practically interchangeable right now. So any nuance we try and draw out, I think is potentially confusing.
And those developers, do you think did they talk about FAS as sort of a generic thing, including not just serve as an HTTP based function invocation, more in the generic?
They see functions as a service as the generic term for what this is. And in fact, they're frustrated at some of the projects who've taken on the name for their own uses because they see it as a generic term.
Yeah. I think serverless also involves events or triggers, right? Actually, I kind of agree with, I just saw the Amir's comment. I kind of agree with that. I think, serverless, if you look at Amazon or Microsoft, they all involve event trigger.
So, okay, so I think correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think what I'm hearing is do not try to make a distinction between the two. Is there any disagreement with that? Okay.
No.
Okay, so then the question then is, should we make a statement that says something along the lines of, you may hear one or both terms for our purposes or for the purpose of this document, they're interchangeable. Is that something we would like to add to the doc so that people don't get confused?
Yes. Plus one.
Yes, I think
that's what I would. Yeah, that's what I would be leaning towards.
Oh, okay, I shall make that so. Okay.
Perfect.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat that last statement there that we all agreed on?
I was going to add something to the doc that says, for the purposes of this document that we're putting together, the terms serverless and functions as a service are interchangeable.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah, that's my point here. The reason that I did raise the backend as a service is that I think it's a related but separate concept, and we just should point to it as the elephant in the room rather than, I mean, just so people don't ask why is it not in there, because it's.
I agree. I completely agree with what Dan said, and I think a reference to backend as a service is important because it's useful context.
We weren't sure what does it mean for backend as a service.
Yeah, I put a little definition there in the context, and this kind of comes from, I think, how it's been discussed at Serverless Confs and what Mike Roberts wrote. And this is it's more of a consumption model, right? Function as a service, you're writing custom logic that responds to events or triggers, right? You're focused on the compute aspect of it, custom code. The backend as a service idea is you're actually not even writing any code. So there's therefore no functions. What you're doing is assembling existing services into something. Of course, there's probably some glue code in there, but that's, in my mind, the general distinction is, function as a service, you're writing the code, that's serverless, those are events, those are triggered things that are being responded to, versus building a single page application that has no backend infrastructure. It's got something like Auth0 for authentication. It's got something for commerce, maybe. It's got something for like GitHub for hosting static pages.
Would you consider that also along the lines as the Azure Logic Apps?
It could be. I don't know enough about the distinction. I saw a little bit of the demo of it, but I think if that's composing something out of external services, I know it's very GUI driven. But I think in my mind, the prototypical application for backend as a service is just a website that you've written no backend logic for. You've assembled it from something else to do it for you.
Okay.
Or a mobile app. That's another example that was a heavy user of backend as a service type offerings.
Yep.
Yeah, but I'm not sure there is a big distinction because if you wrote the function or someone else, at least our vision is there will be sort of app markets for functions, and for that we need those levels of abstraction that we're trying to discuss in the spec. And then if someone else wrote it and you bought it for I don't know, 2 cents an invocation or 2 cents a month, or I write it, I don't think it's a big enough distinction.
That sounds like
I think my understanding of this, correct me if I'm wrong, a backend as a service, I think here what you mean is some function need to access another service, maybe in the cloud platform. For example, when the function executes, right, they need to store some results into some database, or it needs to access some other service in the cloud. Right? Is that what you mean?
That it's
the backend. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just kind of typing out my comment. Sorry, on the doc itself is kind of how I see it. But I'm sorry, I missed that. But I think, just to summarize, I think it's code that you aren't writing is maybe the biggest distinction.
So maybe we should just say that functions could either be developed by you, or you can have a consumption model for functions. Where you can just basically use someone else's functions and just route data into it, and events into it, and get results.
Sure, but I don't think this backend as a service definition is necessarily tied to functions particularly. I think it's just highlighting the fact that backend as a service exists, and we should be aware of it in the context of thinking about serverless. I think that's the reason that Dan wanted it to be there, and I would agree with that. Tell me if I'm getting this wrong, Daniel.
No, you're right, Amir. That's exactly.
Yeah.
So you look at it basically as a use case for functions.
Well, it's not so much a use case as much as it's part of the. I'm not sure there's the right phrase, but part of the infrastructure of a function. Right, a function may need to access additional services, and that's where backend of the service comes into play.
Yeah, but that's
I agree.
That's part of a function composition or function dependency graph.
I think we're confusing this by. I think we're confusing this.
the name maybe should be data binding or something like that, which is something that the function is using as to access the backend storage.
You mean backing stores like database services and things like that, or you mean other functions that are stateless?
I was thinking more backend data store type of as an example.
Yeah, so for that, if you look at the definition by Azure that we also sort of adopted is talking about data bindings, which is sort of, you sort of create a policy for what you want to connect to, and that's sort of externalized from the function. So if I have the same function, let's assume it's doing, I don't know, image processing on set of objects, okay? So I can decouple this function that does image processing from the data repository that you want to do the image processing on, and that data repository is could be connected through configuration. You say, okay, that's part of an environment variable or a data binding context variable. And this is how you sort of create a consumption model for functions, because you decouple the sort of incoming and outgoing feeds and required data from the function implementation. That's exactly sort of those data bindings.
I think it's good to define this backend as a service. I think it's good. I think this is more towards, this is more about, a function will access the infrastructure service, and not more about accessing another third party's function library.
Yeah, but if we want to refer to the backend as specifically, this is a persistent backend. It's not just another function which can be stateless. So let's give it the name of sort of data binding, and not just a generic backend as a service. Because I can create a backend that does authentication or does I don't know what, calculates 1 + 1, and that will still be my backend. So in order to be clear, we've addressed it as sort of a data binding, which is a more concrete definition, and also adopted by guys like Azure.
So Dan, let me ask you a question, because I think this follows on with, I think, Lee's comment in there, which is, do we need to mention this at all? I kind of understand the desire to include it because it's part of the bigger picture, and people may be confused between serverless versus backend as a service. But there's a little part of me that's wondering whether mentioning it might actually cause some confusion, because I'm kind of looking at this as an implementation detail of how I choose to implement my function.
Right. Well, I think, yeah, Amir and I think, I'm sorry. I think it's just we have to just mention as the elephant in the room. That even if we, it's not naturally there, it's just because it's been included in previous conversations. I think however we describe it or however we disown it, it just should be, listen, there's this term out there. This is how it relates. It's not within really the scope of what we are talking about.
Okay, so you want to mention it to make sure people understand that it's not the same thing, right?
Right. So we might even add it as like a call out box or a note, something that's kind of like meta information then rather than. Okay. Maybe it's
well, in that case, it seems like I need to add some additional text to make it clear that we're mentioning this for that purpose, to make sure people understand there is a difference there, and that this really is something that's used sort of behind the scenes, but there may be some confusion as to its relationship to its relationship to serverless, and that's why we're mentioning it, not because it's necessarily one and the same or something like that. Okay, I'll try to work on some text on that.
And there is another spot in the document where it's mentioned. I don't know if that was in.
Yeah, and I think we should also add that it's the same as data binding, since we are using that terminology within the function specification, since it's relying on a backend service, which is a data binding. So
yeah, we haven't really invented the term. That's part of 12-factor, so. I think it really depends what you mean. If you're talking about sort of something which is invisible from the user, and there is some sort of data that as a platform provider I'm using, that's one thing. If it's visible to the function consumer, where he actually needs to specify something in order to use that resource, then it may be a different thing.
For example, it's secrets authentication and stuff like that, which would be needed for data binding. So it wouldn't be transparent to the function user.
Do you need to describe the mechanism? I feel data binding is a mechanism, right? So here we are just define the terminology. I think it's good actually to define this backend as a service terminology so people understand, when you write the function, you can access some backend service provided by the infrastructure, which is not part of the kind of the serverless definition itself.
Yeah, but I think that this term of backend is too loose. You got both of us here confused about this term because backend can mean many things to many people.
Okay, well, I think I have my AI, and I'll take a stab at trying to address the concerns brought up here. Okay, are there other topics or other questions on other documents?
Can we talk about framework for a quick second? The
Yes.
definition here. The point I'd like to make on this is I've seen framework used, for example, in serverless.com uses it as a serverless framework to build their applications, whereas like Fission.io uses it saying Fission is a framework for serverless functions on Kubernetes. I think frameworks being overused between those two use cases. One is an implementation of serverless, and the other is a library that helps you create applications and deploy them out onto serverless. How does the team think about framework?
That's a good question. I think as it's worded here, it's vague enough that it covers both of those use cases. But,
Success.
but I think it might make sense then, right, to say, for example, this can refer to the runtime such as Fission or the library, the programming model that you use. But it's vague enough that it does cover that.
Well, which one do you guys want it to refer to? I purposely wrote it vague because I wasn't quite sure which way to go with it, to be perfectly honest.
So for framework, we're talking about framework?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So for framework, when I think of, this is very generic terminology, very generic. So when I think of framework in serverless, I'm thinking about the serverless, the serverless infrastructure architecture framework from the serverless providers, the serverless platform framework or architecture that support the serverless functionality. That's what I would think of when people say serverless framework.
So then what would be the difference? So Kathy, in your mind, what would be the difference between a framework in that case and say serverless runtime?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, serverless runtime. Yeah, I think that's more unclear. Serverless runtime is very specific to the packages, right? The environmental packages. Yeah. Not framework, yeah.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a great, you could almost, like where we have serverless runtime, you could almost have runtime framework. I think this is somewhat anecdotal, but I think it's somewhat unfortunate that the serverless crew, the serverless.com crew chose framework as their project name, just because it, because it is so generic, and people have kind of stumble over it as they're using the English language to just talk about the framework that they're using, and then people get confused on whether or not they're referring to that specific implementation. And so runtime framework, and then the other one might be potentially management framework. I think management is too broad of a term to describe the serverless framework.
Or development framework.
Yeah, that's true.
So with development, if we replace framework with development framework, then is that just the environment in which you develop your functions themselves, but they're not necessarily deployed into it? Is that the right way to view it?
Yeah, I think that's, right. Yeah, the runtime, right, runtime.
Okay.
So, okay. So what we are trying to define here, so there's here is the environment in which functions are developed and deployed. Oh, okay, you're changing it. Okay. Because developer and deployed is different. They are they are different things, right?
Nice.
This is true design by committee. Love it. Okay, so what I think I'm looking at now is two different terms: development framework versus runtime framework. So development framework is the environment in which you develop your functions. Runtime framework is the environment in which the functions themselves are actually executed. Is that the right way to think of it?
Those are the two ideas, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction.
Okay. Okay, so. Okay, I can work on tweaking that appropriately.
This is Louis. Could we elaborate a little bit on the workflow function graph that you have there? To my mind,
Yeah, I think I'm going. Yeah, I will add that. Yeah, definition. I can add that. Or someone else. Yeah, I will add that.
Thank you, Kathy.
Kathy, I don't know if that was a call to help, but I can help if.
Okay.
Yeah, I would see that as some form of possibly a coordination function to potentially sequence different functions, something like that. Anyway, I'll be willing to help out with any work there.
I do not recognize the voices yet. Who is the last person who was offering to help?
Louis. This is Louis Furry.
And who's the person before that?
I think that was Kathy.
Yeah, I think it was Lee Calcode, and Kathy Zhang was. I think Kathy dropped.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Okay. Well, Kathy's easy. Kathy, I recognize that one's easy. Okay, thank you.
And who's the dog?
Yeah, who's the dog? Yeah, I think I get the dog's name in there. Now, what about packages and namespace? I didn't know what to put on that one because it almost felt like an implementation detail, but someone had mentioned it, so I put it in the list, but I wasn't quite sure what to put. What do people think about that one?
I think it's good to define it, package namespace.
Okay.
Yeah, I think some of this went towards addressability too. Like there's a bit of an API gateway story maybe that goes with that. But because functions or actions kind of they're on their own, not necessarily HTTP, and therefore without a URI, is there a way to link back to how they're actually accessed? I think that's more of what that is about.
So can you explain that further? I didn't get it.
So as you're writing a function, it's tied to you can associate it to an event, and it's a non-HTTP type of workload, right? You just want a database change, you want to process some data that's been dropped to an S3 bucket, that sort of thing. Sure. But then the concept, if you do want to use it in HTTP namespace, or you do want to share it, how do you actually do that? How do you make it available, addressable? I think that's what this was mainly about.
I think it was. I think it was mentioned as part of the spec, and some of the issue is around. Can you normalize some of the event metadata? For example, let's assume you have a property called body or called content type. And content type could be something that's part of an HTTP message, and it could also be something that when you get a buffer from a message queue could sort of be the same. So I think there are some elements of metadata that could be sort of converged across multiple types of events. And some other elements, like if you're talking about a database stream that includes old records and new records and primary keys and whatever, and type of operation, that will be harder to sort of converge. We are actually working quite a bit on that, because in our framework, we do seek to have this notion that you can sort of invoke the function from a message queue or an HTTP call or some other mechanism, but it's sometimes harder than it sounds.
Yeah, I think that more fits under the event data term.
Yeah. Did you review this section in the document and the events?
Not the specification part.
Yep.
Yeah.
I didn't, but yeah, we definitely should make sure these terms align with what's going on there. That's definitely something.
There is a clear separation in our view between, we had this discussion also yesterday with Kathy, between sort of the event structure that is being provided to the function and the actual event source that generates this structure, because you want to have this abstraction. You know, you may run the same function in AWS and use Kinesis as a messaging, as a streaming engine, and maybe on-prem you'll run Kafka. So you don't want necessarily to have the function be aware of what was the actual, event source, maybe through properties, but not as a class. You really want it to be aware of what is sort of the event type and the metadata without necessarily binding to a specific, implementation of this event source.
Okay. There's a lot of paper shuffling I hear in the background. You may want to go on mute.
So I think that we should coordinate the terminology used in other sections. So do you want each section owner to add terminology that it's used within that terminology section, or you want to do it the other way around after reviewing all other section, adding those terminology within this section as well?
Well, I think if people can edit this document
Sure.
before, say, the end of the week with terminology from the other sections and move it into here, I'd rather get that done. I'd rather have it obviously defined in one spot instead of multiple places. And if we can get it done before Ken takes his first pass at trying to merge the docs, I think that'd be better. So if you guys can get that done before the end of the week, I think it'd be great.
I would agree. So if you can give a writer permission to others, then we can just edit and add our terminology within it.
Yep. Okay. I'll go through and do that. Actually, hold on a minute. Let me make sure I write that down as an AI.
Great.
Otherwise, I will forget. Yes.
But I think, one key point is we should not try to avoid, using different terminology to define similar thing. For example, like event data here, I think is some people might say this is like a event metadata or some other terminology. So but it all refers to information, pertaining to the event that occurred.
Yeah, I think but we made it simpler. It's called event data and metadata. So, there are portions which is obviously a data if you're getting, sort of a blob, and there is a lot of metadata, but it's sort of kept as event data and metadata.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun to make sure we're all using the same terminology as we merge the docs, but that's something we have to obviously go through and do as part of the edit stage. All right. Any other things to discuss relative to this doc? Okay. What about in the other docs? Are there any topics on, say, positioning or scope or any of the others, put it that way?
Actually, before we go, I have a question here. So when we say the package or context, how about when the function's language, right? It has a runtime, what kind of language? The package, I'm not sure what terminology we should use, but when the function either is Python or Java or Node.js, right? It has its own kind of running environment or package to go with it together. We should define that, right?
So you're talking about the function language itself?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's what we should call. So I'm trying to ask people's input. Or should we call the function language? Because I heard some people call that the function package, something like that. But we have a package name /namespace there.
I think the runtime is the thing which is sort of language specific.
That's right.
Yeah. Function language.
Yeah,
I worry about getting too precise on that front. That might be going into, I don't know, too much of a specification mode.
Would you? So am I hearing correct that people say rather than defining a separate term for this, maybe talk about how the runtime framework may have a specific set of languages in which the functions should be written. Is that the right way to think of it?
I think so.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, and it's just going to be a nightmare trying to keep up as those languages change and as projects, come in for frameworks come and go.
Okay.
Runtime environment.
There is another sort of related thing I've listed in the sort of event data source thing is today many frameworks actually use JSON as the way to provide sort of the data to the function, and that could be nice for some applications. But when you're moving it to like streaming, or maybe you want to deploy the function in like a low-powered IoT device, that may not be a good idea. So in some cases, we may want to generalize the data structures to use sort of native language structures, or things like protobuf or something like that, and not necessarily buying into saying JSON is the way to go with functions.
Okay. Any other comments?
This is Lee again. I've got one. So I see that we've got rules that, rules define how triggers are mapped. And I guess it sort of leads me, I think someone earlier on the call mentioned Azure's logic apps, and which in my mind is somewhat congruent with Lambda's step functions and kind of orchestration and tying these functions together. But I don't know that we've called out any, and I don't know if it's necessary, maybe it's not, but I don't know if we've called out any terminology around interconnection of functions, input and output from the next, and just, orchestration in general. I don't know if that's.
Is that related to the workflow function graph?
Yeah, I thought that's where that would fall under. Maybe we could elaborate a little bit more on that if that's needed.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And
yeah,
you're right.
Kathy started building that section in the spec on the workflow.
Yeah, I will add it here. Yeah, and with Louis and Lee together. Yeah.
All right. Now we have 8 minutes left. Are there other things on this document or any other document people want to mention or bring up?
Relating to the comment on JSON and other formats for the event data, maybe we could just add something on that bullet on event data to say that there
are. I already, it's already there. What I wrote there is some implementations focus on JSON, maybe desired, blah, blah.
Okay. That's fine.
Okay. You could just go over the spec and see if you want to change it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anything else? Okay, I think we picked on this doc pretty well. But should we pick on a different doc in the last 7 minutes?
I think, well, there's a related concept in the scope document. I don't remember, Mark, I guess you wrote this one, but we had some questions, I think, about this one as well. If you guys want to switch to the scope document.
Yeah, let's go to the scope document. Let me paste a link. Oops. Paste a link into the chat. Okay, there's the link.
Yeah, so this seems to be arranged according to the outline. Is right, there's basically, I think we're talking about some of the implementations that are out there so people understand what they are, basically what they do and how they might differentiate. And so there's a talk about the public cloud services, the open source serverless, and then there's a third item which was unclear, which was this open source services.
Oh, yeah.
Where I thought it might come back to that BAS argument, the backend as a service argument, but I didn't know if that was meant to be something else here.
Yeah, the intent here was to just describe the types of services, and especially on the open source side, that would interoperate with a functions as a serverless infrastructure, because obviously having functions run isn't as interesting as having the services tied in with them to be able to do things like API proxy, or even have data store for the stateless functions.
So are you saying that basically this open source services are basically open source versions of the backend as a service category of things?
To a certain degree, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
it could be.
Okay.
In
Yeah,
fact,
I read this link that you wrote there, and it sounds to me like what you refer to as backend as a service is what people usually refer to as platform services, because that's sort of part of, if you think about Amazon, that's part of the Amazon platform services. You know,
You gotta be a little bit. You gotta be a little careful though. The only concern there is to say it's a platform service. It may imply that you can't necessarily use a service that's hosted outside of the platform, and I'm not sure that's necessarily the case.
Yeah, but in the context of those things that were mentioned, like which are pretty essential, like authentication service, you know, it's something that has to be integrated as a low-level thing under the framework. It's not something that just the function goes and consumes. If it's just anything that the function goes and consumes, it's no different than any other, you know, you could just go and deploy Redis in a different server and connect to it through TCP. There's no nothing holding you back. But I think the context of this discussion, of this blog post that I read, was about you know, the underlying layer, you know, where the serverless sits above. So, you know, if you're building sort of a serverless framework in a vacuum, then you sort of starting to think, okay, who's my authentication service? Where am I storing my monitoring data? You know, which key value am I using to store state, etc. Then those, you know, from my view, these are more the platform services that are used by and maybe platform is like someone needs to do this integration, because it's not serverless if you're basically saying the customer is going to do the integration with the authentication service and the databases and etc. You know, just like OpenWhisk comes together with CouchDB and, you know, Kafka and everything, and that's sort of integrated. This is sort of the platform where the, you know, the FAS or the whatever serverless.
But I didn't feel that OpenWhisk is opinionated enough that you can't include other databases or key value stores for the function's own use.
No, but I think it's different things. You do use Couchbase as a way to store the low levels of the FAS, you know, the implementation. Right. Within the function, you can access any database, but you cannot just go and switch Kafka used for the messaging in OpenWhisk with any other thing without doing changes to the framework.
So I think what we need here, right?
I think I'm agreeing with you, and I see these services as being add-on services above the implementation of a serverless framework, serverless runtime framework.
Yeah, if you look at the diagram that we put in the spec, we sort of put there a layer, sort of a base layer of saying platform services. It doesn't really matter who brings them, but they're sort of the foundations that this serverless runtime and, you know, controllers and API gateways and all those things sit on above it. You know, someone may see that and say, you know what, Kubernetes is my platform. Someone else will say, you know, I'll build my own stuff and add databases, etc., and that will be my platform. So it's not an exact term, but it's sort of, I think it's really the foundation where the serverless sits on top. And then within the function, you may access any other services, but that's, as far as I understand, not what you meant with the backend as a service.
I'm not quite sure how to resolve that one.
Well, I think if we keep this in here, it definitely needs an introductory paragraph that describes basically what the intent is and how it relates. Maybe I don't know. Mark, did you want to run with that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, are you sort of basically defining like the prerequisites for building a serverless? You know, I don't know if the right term is framework, but so there are sort of foundation services that you need to use in order to build serverless. If I understand this, you know, this backend as a service term. Yeah. So maybe let's call them foundation services or whatever. But it's not backend as a service. It doesn't mean anything.
Okay. All right. So we're coming up at the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of people's time. Are there any last-minute short items to bring up, or Ken, are there things you wanted to mention? Okay, so I guess just to reiterate then.
Nope, I'm good. Sorry, I was hanging off the mute.
Okay, yeah, so just to reiterate, people are going to edit the terminology doc, try to move the terminology definitions into one document by the end of this week. By early next week, the people who had AIs to write a couple of new sections are going to ping Ken when they're done, so he'll know when it's safe to actually merge docs, and then I'll make that available for everybody to review. And then we have a call in 2 weeks, and we're shooting for August 1st TOC call to present it to those guys.
Yeah, so the big goal here, Doug, is that in 2 weeks we'll have a single document that's been all pulled together. So.
Yep.
So Doc, you're going to send out meeting minutes for the action item, right? So we can remember
it's in the meeting notes on the. If you go to the CNCF
I know that.
GitHub, just go to the meeting notes and it's right there.
Okay. How about agenda? Do we have an agenda in that web page for the next week?
Yeah, we pretty much follow. Yeah, we pretty much follow the same agenda format. It's just at least at this early stage, we're kind of finalizing the document and reviewing everyone's comments, making sure that's done. So as we go forward and have more specific agenda items and presentations, we'll have more on the that would definitely be the place to go to look for like the agenda items where it talks about the next meeting and the contact information and get into the meeting. We'll post an agenda there.
Okay, I see. Okay, I'll put my name there.
All right, I think we're done then.
Okay, good.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay,
have a good day.
Guys.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.